Good morning. Welcome to the King's Report for Saturday, April 21st, 2018, 9th year of Cheonggi, 3rd month, and the 6th day by the heavenly calendar. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king of Cheonggi, Hyung Moon. And let's go right away to the weather. It's clear and 31 degrees right now at the Cheonggi Palace. Maybe going down to 29 before the sun rises, going up today to 58 degrees, mostly sunny. And then being clear tonight, but again going down to 29 degrees, so below freezing tonight. Looking ahead, looks like tomorrow is going to be in the 60s, 62, mostly sunny and pleasant during the day, and that's actually right at the historical average, because we've been quite a bit below that average for some time now, for most of the month of April, and we're glad to get up there because it's getting kind of tiring, all this cold, and even this morning, no snow or ice this morning, but plenty of frost. Then Monday and Tuesday will be 64, and looks like it'll be in the 70s as we go into May, looking way ahead. At least the forecast for May 1st right now is 74, and the first week of May should be in the 70s or upper 60s. All right, let's go to the headlines this morning. On Drudge, the headline says it refreshes this particular moment. I want to talk today about one of the headlines on Drudge, and that is about yesterday being the 420, and apparently that's a traditional day for people who like marijuana to smoke marijuana together, so we'll be going into that later on. But the top headline on Drudge this morning is "Start of the Deal: North Korea freezes missile tests." Listen, we can trust Kim Jong-un just about as far as we can throw him. I guess some people think this is a big thing that he's saying that he's freezing his missile test. Actually, not even he that is saying it. It's the South Koreans who are saying that he said it. So again, the South Koreans acting as the messenger boys for Kim Jong-un. But anyway, we'll look at that later on. It's kind of obligatory, I suppose. But on the upper left, Drudge has that the Department of Justice is looking closely at the Comey memos that were handed to Congress a day before yesterday, 15 pages or so, and they're looking at those to see if any classified information was leaked. In the memos, Trump talks about jailing journalists and prostitutes. Sessions tells the White House that Rosenstein firing could prompt his departure. So that thing is still going on inside the Beltway there. Elsewhere on Drudge, ISIS threatens CNN and Universal Studios. Al-Qaeda video shows Google Maps being used to plan attacks. AT&T Verizon investigated for collusion. Trump blasts OPEC cartel keeping oil prices artificially very high will not be accepted. I think we've all noticed that gasoline prices have been going up recently. CDC warns a lettuce-linked E. coli outbreak expands. Yes, CDC is asking everyone to, we'll look at it, but make sure, but I think asking everyone to throw away any romaine lettuce that you may have lying around. And marijuana, Schumer wants to legalize marijuana. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, minority leader in the Senate, has introduced a bill that would decriminalize. I don't think this Drudge says legalize, but I think the language is to decriminalize it. And there's a subtle difference there, important difference. State warns drivers to use caution on 420. Marijuana haze rises from San Francisco's Hippie Hill. California cities want Amsterdam-style lounges. And 85% of NBA, 89% of NFL smoke pot. But California government opens the door to recriminalizing marijuana in that state. Well, we'll see. We'll look at that after we go through the other headlines. There's a pill that turns off sperm. My Dearest Fidel, ABC journalist's secret liaison with Castro. Buzz and mystery surround Apple's TV ambitions. Asian push to crack down on fake news sparks alarm. In Asia, in East Asia, East Asian dictatorships and authoritarian states, the idea of censoring news has been going on for a very, very long time. The term fake news is, I think, an American term, but, they called it rumors. Rumors and false information, I think, is what they called it. People who spread those kinds of things were routinely jailed and punished very severely. So, and that is the mark of an authoritarian regime, that they do not allow freedom of the press, and they crack down on what the government considers to be fake news. A student traumatized after Underground Railroad reenactment, all black kids slaves. Democrats are suing over Russia, Trump, and WikiLeaks. Fundraising woes tied to 2016 conspiracy. Hillary, they were never going to let me be president. Wow. She can't get a life, can she? Wow. She's still hung up on this. Philippe Reigns are writing New York Times expose. Talent agencies circling Stormy Daniels' lawyer. Russia sends warship through the English Channel as tensions mount. China military islands now control the South China Sea. Definitely have to look at that. Beijing final touches on battle plan to take back Taiwan. Yeah, no doubt. Army self-aware robot squid. Baltimore Police Commissioner apologizes to crowd at hip-hop concert for 200 years of policing history. Wow, that's a lot of apologizing. Gets booed for that. The police officer dealt drugs from squad car. Southwest gives $5,000 to passengers on fatal flight. A pilot arrested in cockpit was 4 times over drink-fly limit. Mobile skyscrapers, printed buildings reveal high life of the future. A 4,000-year-old artwork on exhibit at New York City show. Okay. A driver unhurt after car's 50-foot plunge. A wide waist with normal weight, bigger risk than obesity. Woman steals ID to get 6-figure job but can't do the work. 106-year-old credits love of music for her long life. Irked postal patron cracks global plant smuggling scheme. And the actress Allison Mack arrested for alleged sex cult role. And school bus driver removed after leading a prayer. The Army misses recruiting goal, stricter physical tests, pet cloning here. Humans next. Just remember, there's a story I want to cover that's not on Drudge, but it's actually on my phone. Let's see here. I came in on my email. See if I can find it quickly here. Yeah, here we go. Now listen to this. This is something that happened locally, and says in Union Township, Pennsylvania, a brave act is getting 3 students the title of high school heroes in Luzerne County. Luzerne is a county that's not so far from here. The Northwest area students managed to stop their bus after the driver had a medical emergency. Friends Joe May, Sam Troy, and Ashton Strish say they were just regular high school teenagers, but people at Northwest Area High School near Shikshini say differently. In an email sent out by their principal to faculty staff, Principal Rayan Miner writes, I wanted to take a minute to tell you all about 3 student heroes here at Northwest. Miner explains that on April 11th, the 3 boys were on their way back to the high school riding on Route 11 after leaving the Wilkes-Barre Area Career and Technical Center when their bus driver suffered a medical emergency and passed out. Joe, a 16-year-old sophomore, says he just snapped into action. So then I grabbed the wheel and I pulled it over and I put it in park, and then I unbuckled her and we ran around to get her. Thank God we pulled in front of this guy's house, and I don't know his name. As Sam, a 15-year-old freshman, and Ashton, a 16-year-old sophomore, got their driver out of the van, a man came out of the house prepared to do CPR. I got the doors unlocked, and Sam got her out, put her the side. He put his hoodie under her and then me and Joe grabbed ours and put them on top so she wouldn't get cold, said Ashton. I got her out of the car, laid her on the ground, and the guy came out, and I guess he was medically certified, said Sam. Sam laid her down, and the guy was getting ready to do CPR, and then she started breathing again. Then I called 911 to get the ambulance over, said Joe. The boys say they've heard their driver is okay, but haven't seen her since the incident. Now folks in their school are hailing their brave actions. Automatic reaction. I don't know what else to say about it, said Joe. I don't consider myself a hero. I just did what I thought was right, said Sam. We just did something we should have. We did what anyone else would have done at the time, said Ashton. The principal says the boys were recognized at a school board meeting this past Wednesday and were given gift cards to area stores. Wow, so this is the reason I want to bring this up is that these young boys didn't just panic. You know, in a case like that, when you're in a bus or you're in a van, apparently in this case, and the driver passes out, there's a natural reaction. Just goes, we're all going to die, we're all going to die. But instead of doing that, they kept their wits about them and got the vehicle stopped, got the doors open, and started dealing with the situation. And they were very fortunate that the man in the house where they stopped also responded quickly. And I guess we don't know who that man was, but anyway, he also responded quickly, and they got 911 there. They've heard that the driver is okay, although they haven't seen her since the incident. So yeah, these are the kind of people that kind of young men that we want to train here. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring that up. After all the bad news that's in the news these days, that shows you what can happen here. All right, where were we? Back to the bad news. Let's see. Oh yeah, school bus driver removed after leading the prayer. That's what reminded me of that. And Army misses recruiting goal, stricter physical tests. Pet cloning here. Humans next. Yes, I'm running as a socialist. Candidates embracing the label of socialism. In California, man had a kill list of prominent Jews in the entertainment industry. And German neo-Nazis mass for festival on Hitler's birthday. Natalie Portman denounced by Israeli government for over decision not to collect an award. A kangaroo in a zoo dies after pelted by bricks from tourists trying to see it hop. Come on, guys. Let's love God's creation the way he would. Amy Schumer, sorry for being white. Magazine, are newspapers necessary? Boston Globe columnist faces fabrication claims. And Pulitzer winners are moving to PR. Humans perform better when they have an audience despite being more nervous, say scientists. Well, yeah, duh. You know, pressure and tension, stress produce a better performance. I mean, that's, you don't have to get paid to do that, to know that. So I want to go into these headlines on the marijuana situation. Apparently, I never knew this until, 66 years old? This is the first time I'm hearing about it. But apparently April 20th is the day for smoking marijuana, and especially 4:20 in the afternoon. And according to the CBS affiliate in San Francisco, this all started in their area. Maybe that's why I haven't heard about it. And CBS says hundreds gathered on and around Hippie Hill in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park Friday, celebrating the first 420 days since recreational pot became legal in California. An unofficial pot holiday started by 5 friends at a Marin County high school in 1971 and has grown to where festivities were planned worldwide, culminating with a synchronized smoke at 4:20 p.m. Charles Vance took 3 weeks to hitchhike to San Francisco from Washington State to take part in the celebration. All the people around me, said Vance, for the reason behind his journey, sharing the same vibe, the same experience. It's a communal feeling. The gates opened at 9 a.m. By noon, several hundred people were already at the gathering. Booths lined the area around the bottom of the hill selling pot-laced edibles. San Francisco officials say they expected at least 15,000 people to assemble in time for the 420 smoke, Recon Park officials estimated that the final crowd size was closer to 20,000. Authorities Friday afternoon confirmed that ambulances were responding to multiple medical emergencies, including at least one opioid overdose at Hippie Hill. As of 4:30 p.m., no arrests had been reported. Event producer and Haight Street business owner Alex Aquino said he expected the crowd to exceed the previous years because of it being a Friday, a sunshine-filled day, and the legalization of recreational marijuana in the state. Last year we had an incredible turnout, and that was on a Thursday, Aquino said. Today's a Friday, so it's getting a lot bigger. Aquino said the organizers had doubled security to make sure that the vibe stays peaceful and also added a much larger cleanup crew to make sure the park is pristine after the event ends Friday around 6 p.m. When asked why he thought the crowd would exceed last year, Aquino said legalization will bring more celebrants to the park. It's legal, he said. People are parking and celebrating on a Friday in a beautiful weather and beautiful Golden Gate Park. The event also had a strong presence in San Francisco police officers. Marijuana is legal, but it's illegal to smoke marijuana in public, Park Station Police Captain Una Bailey said. And the 420 event will be inside the park, and within that fenced area, people can smoke pot in there. But once they come out into the city streets, no, they will not be allowed to smoke pot. They will be subject to our laws as usual. Additionally, Bailey said both uniformed and plainclothes officers would be checking for juveniles smoking marijuana and drivers who may be impaired. Elsewhere in the Bay Area, there are a wide variety of events planned. An all-day educational cannabis event is taking place at Oaksterdam University in Oakland, with legal horticulture and cooking experts on hand, according to Dale Sky Jones of Oaksterdam. Our campus is family-friendly, willing to distribute knowledge, not cannabis, Jones said. The venue is at, anyway, they give the address. At least 2 marijuana dispensaries will have extended hours. The Berkeley Parent Patients Group in Berkeley will be open until 10 p.m. There will be vendor demos, photo booth, snacks, and raffles all day. Bay Area Harborside marijuana dispensaries will be open until 8 p.m. The dispensaries have 2 locations, and one in Oakland and one in San Jose. So apparently a good time was had by all yesterday in San Francisco and the Bay Area. My cards are on the table. I have never smoked marijuana. During my first term in university, my roommate was actually basically the wholesaler for marijuana and other substances on our floor in the dorm. I went to a college where dorm life was compulsory for freshmen because they wanted to do all sorts of social engineering. And he would tell me, "Hey Tim, open up your mind. My mind is open enough. Thank you." So anyway, I've never had this experience. So all this is very, very, very curious and strange to me. My feeling always was, if cigarettes are going to kill you, what do you suppose this is going to do? It's certainly not going to be good for you. So anyway, people have this strange affinity for this substance. But anyway, meanwhile, in Colorado, where marijuana is legal or decriminalized, I'm not sure which. There's a difference between illegal and decriminalized. Decriminalized means basically it's a civil fine, like a parking ticket, for example. But right now, depending on how much you have, I guess, of marijuana, you can actually go to jail. So it's a criminal offense right now. So people are talking about legalizing it, decriminalizing it, and there's an important difference there. Anyway, Colorado Governor Hickenlooper talks about making pot illegal again if tied to crime. He says, "I'm not ruling it out." Colorado Governor Hickenlooper was against legalizing marijuana, but once the voters spoke, he went along and defended Coloradans' right to use recreational pot. In an interview with CNN, he appears to be opening the door a crack to the idea of recriminalizing cannabis. Hickenlooper was interviewed for a CNN piece posted Friday that noted a rise in Colorado crime rate since 2014, when recreational marijuana went on sale legally in the state following a constitutional amendment passed by voters in November 2012 That's an amendment to the Colorado Constitution. Medical marijuana was legalized in Colorado years earlier. And the piece presented conflicting views from Colorado law enforcement officials on whether pot legalization has led to a rise in crime. Asked in the interview whether he was ruling out a correlation between a rising crime rate and legal marijuana, Hickenlooper told CNN, "No, I'm not ruling it out." When CNN's interviewer said, "But no one is saying you can put the genie back in the bottle," the Democratic governor said this, "No, not yet we aren't, but trust me, if the data was coming back and we saw spikes in violent crime, we saw spikes in overall crime, there would be a lot of people looking for that bottle and figuring out how we get the genie back in. It doesn't seem likely to me, but I'm not ruling it out." Recriminalizing marijuana in Colorado would take another vote of the people to undo the constitutional amendment, approved by 55% to 45% less than 6 years ago. Since then, pot has been legalized in several other states. This is one of the great social experiments of the last 100 years, Hickenlooper told CNN. We have to all keep an open mind. Asked on Friday afternoon about Hickenlooper's comments to CNN, the governor's office told Colorado Politics that Hickenlooper was saying if the crime statistics were higher and a direct link to marijuana could be established, lots of people, the governor included, would be concerned. If the landscape changes on any issue facing the state, marijuana, air quality, homelessness, and the like, we will push to do what's best for Colorado, Hickenlooper's spokeswoman, Jack Montgomery said. Of course, any change to the Constitution would require a vote of the people. The crime statistics cited in the piece do not directly link the increase since 2014 to marijuana. Can we attribute that to marijuana? I don't think you can, Denver Police Commander James Henning told CNN. The data is not there. The piece cites Jeffrey Etheridge, who pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of Heather Hoffman in February. Etheridge said he moved to Colorado because his girlfriend at the time had a brother who worked at a dispensary. CNN alluded to transients, though it cited no data to indicate that marijuana played a role in homelessness. In December, Donald Burns, executive director of the University of Denver's Burns Center on Poverty and Homelessness, told the Denver City Council that evidence to support a link between pot and homelessness in Colorado is only anecdotal. He said that linking overall population growth to pot also is specious without better data. It is unfortunate to see that CNN has erroneously reported Governor John Hickenlooper's position on legal marijuana by suggesting that the governor would ban legal sales, said Peter Marcus, a spokesman for the Boulder-based national cannabis company Terrapin Care Station and a former Colorado politics reporter. We're filing this one in the fake news category, said Marcus. The people of Colorado placed legal marijuana in the state constitution in 2012, and since that time, support for a regulated system has only grown. The voters of Colorado stand by a regulated cannabis system, and so does Governor Hickenlooper. As a former journalist, I'm a little sad CNN didn't put more time into gathering all of the facts. We encourage CNN to do better by clarifying and correcting this erroneous story. Hickenlooper's comments came on the heels of last week's news that U.S. Senator Cory Gardner, Republic of Colorado, would lift his block on Department of Justice nominations in exchange for an assurance from President Donald Trump that federal officials would not target Colorado's retail marijuana industry. Gardner had imposed the block after Attorney General Jeff Sessions appeared to threaten a tougher federal stance against states with legal pot. Gardner is seeing it as a states' rights issue. All right. So let me just remind you what the Choniu Constitution says about this. I think many people are aware of this, but just to bring that up again, there's in Principle 3, Article 3, Section 9, Paragraph 17, the Constitution states as follows: Congress is prohibited from passing laws. I'm sorry, that's the wrong paragraph. I want to go to 18. Paragraph 18. Congress may regulate, but is prohibited from outlawing intoxicating substances. So, in the Constitution of the United States of Choniguk, Congress cannot outlaw marijuana. And some people get the wrong impression from this, saying that that means that it's okay in Choniguk to smoke marijuana or to smoke or to use cocaine or heroin or opioids or any all these other substances. And the answer is no, that's not true. It is not true. It's important to understand that the Chinese Constitution is designed to limit the powers of government, so as to maximize the sovereignty and the powers of the states, of the local communities, but especially the families. Because the kingdom of God, the kingdom of Chanuguk, is a kingdom of kings. It's an upside-down kingdom, where the government does not lord it over the people. Instead, the government is actually serving the people. And the reason that the Congress cannot outlaw marijuana and other substances like that is because the education and the treatment regarding these substances needs to happen in the private sector. Religious organizations, community organizations, families especially, need to educate themselves and educate children about marijuana and heroin and cocaine and other things. So I think that marijuana use in Chanuguk after some time, in the long run, will be much less than what it is today. I don't think. I suspect that 200 years from now, assuming that San Francisco is part of Chanuguk at that time, 200 years from now, I don't think you're going to see a marijuana haze on Hippie Hill on April 20th. Pretty sure of that, because I think by that time people have figured out that this stuff is actually not so good for you. Of course, medical marijuana, and people who need to use it, they will be free to use it because it will not be outlawed. And people who have a legitimate medical reason to use marijuana as a pain controlling method or whatever will be able to use it because it's not outlawed. But it can be regulated. It can be, says Congress may regulate, but is prohibited from outlawing intoxicating substances. So regulating, so there'll be various ways in which this could be regulated. I don't know what those will be, but Congress can regulate it. But they cannot outlaw marijuana or other intoxicating substances. Cocaine or heroin also cannot be outlawed by Congress. But education about these substances will take place in the private sector and in the families. Basically, Adam and Eve should not have to depend on the archangel to tell them what is right and what is wrong. Adam and Eve can go to God's word for that, and Adam and Eve can study the natural environment and figure out for themselves, which mushrooms are good and which mushrooms are bad. This kind of a thing. They should be able to understand that themselves, without the archangel saying, "Oh no, you can't do that. Can't do that. If you have too much marijuana on you, we're going to put you in jail." No, that's not the role of the archangel. That's not the role of the archangel. All right, and the war on drugs in the United States has been a disaster. The war on drugs, how the war on drugs is destroying Black America. Here is an article from the Cato Institute. This is a think tank in Washington, D.C., and this is actually something from 2011, written by a man here, John McWhorter. The main obstacle to getting Black America past the illusion that racism is still a defining factor in America is the strained relationship between young Black men and police forces. The massive number of Black men in the prison stands as an ongoing and graphically resonant rebuke to all calls to get past racism, exhibit initiative, or stress optimism. And the primary reason for this massive number of Black men in jail is the war on drugs. Therefore, if the war on drugs were terminated, the main factor keeping race-based resentment a core element in the American social fabric would no longer exist. America would be a better place for all. The war on drugs destroys black families. It has become a norm for black children to grow up in single-parent homes, their fathers away in prison for long spells and barely knowing them. In poor and working-class black America, a man and a woman raising their children together is, of all things, an unusual sight. The war on drugs plays a large part in this. It must stop. The war on drugs discourages young black men from seeking legal employment because the illegality of drugs keeps the prices high. There are high salaries to be made in selling them. This makes selling drugs a standing, tempting alternative to seek lower-paying legal employment. The result is usually spells in jail, as well as a failure to build the job skills for legal employment that serve as a foundation for a productive existence in middle and later life. The idea that the problem is an absence of job opportunities is refuted by the simple fact that immigrants, including black ones, regularly make do. It is often said that because immigrants have a unique initiative to pluck in relocating to the United States in the first place, it is unfair to compare black Americans to them. However, the war on drugs has made it impossible to see whether black Americans would exhibit such pluck themselves if drug selling were not a tempting alternative. High black employment rates in the past gave all indication that black men are no strangers to pluck when circumstances require it. The war on drugs makes spending time in prison a badge of honor. The black men involved in the drug trade enduring prison time regarded as an unjust punishment for merely selling people something they want with some justification is seen as a badge of strength. The ex-con is a hero rather than someone who went the wrong way. In the 1920s, before the war on drugs, black Americans, regardless of class level, did not view black ex-cons as heroes. The war on drugs' effects on the black community are impervious to community calls for discipline and leadership. Young black men will not be wooed from selling drugs by black leaders calling for families to take responsibility for their children and keep them off the streets. There are no national black leaders today who have this kind of influence over a significant portion of black people, and there is simply no chance that the NAACP, committed to anti-discrimination activities rather than community uplift, would preach in a constructive fashion anytime soon, if ever. And then black America is too diverse today for the NAACP or the National Urban League to have any serious effect upon all. The days when the White House could invite a quorum of black people considered representative of the race is over. If this were attempted today, one can imagine assorted celebrities invited: Oprah Winfrey, Spike Lee, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, Marion Wright Edelman, John Lewis, Bill Cosby, and so on. Bill Cosby? This was in 2011, by the way, that this was written. But these people do not determine what black America as a whole thinks or does. These people do not have the wherewithal to translate their verdicts into federal policy. So this article goes on quite a bit. But that is just one segment of the black community or black people, just one segment of U.S. society. And this article shows what damage the war on drugs has done to this community. But more than this, even more than this, is that the war on drugs is a principal way by which power is concentrated in the federal government and in the professional police force that is under the federal government. And we need to decentralize power. And if you're going to decentralize power, the war on drugs has to stop, or at least the war on drugs has to be prosecuted in the private sector. The war on drugs, if the war on drugs were prosecuted by religious organizations and community organizations, by family organizations, then there might be a justification for it. But that would not be a war that would involve jail time for most drug possessors or drug users. if a crime is committed, that's one thing. If someone high on heroin or someone is breaking into a house to steal in order to pay for a drug habit, if crime is committed, then of course the crimes are prosecuted. But simple use and possession, these kinds of things should be dealt with through education and treatment rather than in the private sector rather than by putting people in jail. War on drugs has not been successful. How long has this been going on, by the way? Let me just check to see. When did the war on drugs start? It says here 1971. Although Nixon declared drug abuse to be the public enemy number one in 1971, the policies that his administration implemented as part of the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act of 1970 were a continuation of drug prohibition policies in the U.S., which started in 1914. All right, so it's been going on, more than 100 years now, then 104 years, continuation of drug prohibition policies in the U.S., which started in 1914, but officially more under Nixon in 1971. Anyway, whether it's 47 years or 104 years, this has been a very long war, and I think it's past time for us to take a look and see what have we accomplished in 47 years or in 104 years. What has happened? What has accomplished? Well, what has been accomplished is that power has been concentrated in the state and government. And America has acquired the highest rate of incarceration in the world. The number of Americans per 100,000 population who are incarcerated is higher than in any other country in the world. You think it might be a country like China or North Korea, but no, the United States has a higher percentage, higher rate of people in jail. How is that possible? Well, it's possible because power has been concentrated in the state. States are legalizing, decriminalizing, and we'll look at the language of what they're doing. Let's look at what Chuck Schumer is doing. He has introduced a bill to do what exactly? Top Senate Democrat announces marijuana legalization on April 20th. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, on Friday morning announced his intention to introduce legislation to decriminalize the marijuana federally. Today, I'm formally announcing my plan to decriminalize marijuana at the federal level. It's time we allow states once and for all to have the power to decide what works best for them, Schumer wrote on Twitter. Schumer's official announcement followed a Thursday night interview with Vice News in which he discussed the legalization agenda. The sexagenarian senator also signed a bong for the news site, which has attained a marijuana-laced reputation with articles like the best weed strains for mind-blowing sex. Schumer's bill would remove marijuana from the federal drug schedule, a list of regulated substances created by the Controlled Substances Act and administered by the Drug Enforcement Agency. Marijuana is currently a Schedule I drug, meaning it is considered both to have a high potential for abuse and no accepted medical use. This harsh scheduling has been continuous since the list was first created in 1971. The designation puts marijuana alongside drugs like heroin, LSD, ecstasy, and quaaludes. Critics argue that the marijuana Schedule I status has limited scientists' ability to research its potential medical uses, preserving its Schedule I status. There are nonetheless some proposed applications. An FDA panel on Thursday floated a cannabis-derived anticonvulsant. A cannabis-derived anticonvulsant. If approved, that drug might also affect marijuana's Schedule I status. In addition to descheduling, Vice reported Schumer's bill would provide funding for woman and minority-owned marijuana businesses, preserve federal authority to regulate marijuana-related advertising, as with alcohol and tobacco products, and provide funding for marijuana research. So yeah, those are examples of things that would be allowed under the Cheonryugu Constitution as well. Funding for woman and minority-owned marijuana businesses. Heaven forbid that a white man should have a marijuana business. Preserve federal authority to regulate marijuana-related advertising, as with alcohol and tobacco products, and provide funding for marijuana research. So those kinds of regulations are okay under the Cheonryugu Constitution. Schumer cites incarceration for marijuana possession as a reason for his change of mind. Only about 3% of all state prisoners are incarcerated for possession of any drug. Less than 1% are incarcerated for possession of marijuana specifically. Schumer noted on Twitter that 80% of federal level and 60% of state level drug offenders are Latino and Hispanic. He did not distinguish marijuana offenders from others convicted of drug offenses, nor did he disclose that 97.3% of federal drug offenders are incarcerated for trafficking. Schumer also pointed to the state of marijuana arrests as an argument for legalization, claiming based on 2010 data that half of all drug arrests in the U.S. were for marijuana. The Washington Post, using FBI data, estimated that there were just under 600,000 marijuana arrests in 2016. Those arrests accounted for about 37% of the total number of arrests for drug abuse violations. Notably, while state-level legalization of marijuana reduces overall marijuana arrests, racial disparity in arrests persists. 8 states and the District of Columbia have legalized recreational use of marijuana in some way. Despite his overstatement of its impact, Schumer's bill is likely to be politically popular. Recent Gallup poll found that 64% of Americans support legalization. That includes 51% of Republicans, the first time that Gallup has found majority support for legalization in the GOP. At least one prominent Republican has attracted recent headlines for a change in thinking on marijuana. Former House Speaker John Boehner announced last week that he had joined the board of one of the nation's largest cannabis dispensaries and intends to work to shift federal medical marijuana policy. Boehner claimed to have never smoked marijuana. Schumer told Vice that the same was true of him. But when asked if he would, the Senate Majority Leader added, "Maybe. I'm a little old, but who knows?" I guess a politician will smoke anything to get reelected. I'm not. I doubt that I'm going to. Maybe later on when I have a need, when I'm in some kind of pain or something, maybe then when I have a medical need for it, possibly. But listen, the educate. I'm not. And the Second King also definitely does not approve of use of intoxicating substances. Father did not approve the use of intoxicating substances. I cannot find this specifically in Father's words yet, but what I was told, always I caution people about relying too much on what we are told indirectly by Korean leaders about what Father might have said. But with that caveat, what I was told was that Father was discouraged us or told us that we should not drink alcohol because he said that we always need to lead our lives in communion with God, communion with the able spirit world, the good spirit world. And alcohol impedes that process of communicating with God. So we are really receiving God's guidance on a continual, ongoing basis. Sometimes we follow that guidance and sometimes we don't, but that guidance, God is reaching out to us continually. And Father was not speaking about marijuana, but he was speaking about alcohol, saying that drinking alcohol and becoming sort of under the influence of alcohol impedes that process for us to be able to, connect with God. Anyway, that was one of the reasons that I was given, and it sounds like good reason. So for that reason alone, anyway, and probably for other reasons as well, it's not a good idea for people to use marijuana or other intoxicating substances. But the state, the government, the archangel should not be the one that is forcing us by their power of their monopoly of lethal force to make us behave in one way or another. We should know better ourselves. Adam and Eve should not be depending on the archangel for this type of thing. One other story about marijuana. Some California cities want Amsterdam-style pot lounges push limits of marijuana legalization. West Hollywood likes to party. For decades, it has embraced its gay and lesbian bars and the rock and roll debauchery of the Sunset Strip. It runs a free nightlife trolley called The Pickup with a jar of free condoms by the door. Now it's embracing a different type of social scene, pot lounges. The city is poised to allow cannabis lounges where people can consume the once taboo product in a social setting. West Hollywood will join San Francisco, Oakland, and South Lake Tahoe, which earlier this year became some of the first cities in California to open the consumption lounges modeled after those in Amsterdam. Communities in the Coachella Valley are also joining the ranks. All right, so, well, there you go. All right, let's see, that about does it for that topic. So let's take a break now, and we'll come back with more news from a Chonic perspective after this.
Boy, wasn't that fun shooting this Tommy gun today?
It's always fun shooting Tommy guns. This one especially, it's just absolutely gorgeous.
All polished and chromed up. It really looks like $1 million.
Yeah. Elliot Ness would have loved one of those.
Yeah, and it's available right now in your favorite dealer, and you go pick one up.
Yeah, just have him call your distributor.
I mean, the gun, was initially made way back when, back in the 27 is this one.
Yeah. Model 27.
I was surprised by how quick it knocked down those plates.
Oh, 3.5 second run, under 3.5 second run, knocking down a plate right. 341.
I mean, the gun is heavy. It's about what, 12, 14 pounds, especially with this drum. But it's surprising how quick you can go with it. It would actually make quite a good self-defense rifle at home.
If I climbed in somebody's window and they were aiming that at me, I think I'd get out of there real quick. So.
That sounds about right to me.
Just the intimidation factor alone.
Fire!
Welcome back to the King's Report for April 21st, the day after the marijuana smoking 420 day, I guess. Anyway, April 21st of 2018. And Tim Elder sitting in for the second king of Chennuguk, Hyung Moon. And I want to go now into the student walkout that occurred yesterday. Some students around the country, I guess, walked out in protest of the fact that they are not safe in their schools. And they're absolutely right. And I think they're absolutely right to be angry and frustrated by the fact that adults who should be providing a safe environment for them to be able to study are not doing their job. Their solution is wrong, the kids who walked out. Their solution is wrong. But I understand where they're coming from. Certainly if I were in high school today, I would be pretty upset as well. Because it is teachers basically are acting on behalf of parents, right? Because it is the parents' responsibility to educate children, but now we have professionals who are sort of educated and trained to do this. It's better to homeschool still, but some people, a lot of people, most people, I guess, vast majority of people prefer to send their kids off to school so that they can be educated by people they trust, teachers they trust will act on their behalf. But the teachers in the schools are not doing that. They're not protecting the children as they should, not protecting the children as parents would at home. And this is something that students are understandably upset about. But when they blame the National Rifle Association, when they blame the guns, they're going about it the wrong way. Anyway, let's see what happened yesterday. A small group of mostly high school students gathered in front of the White House on Friday as part of the National School Walkout, an anti-gun protest launched by a Connecticut teen following the shooting deaths of 17 people at a Florida high school in February. Following a moment of silence plus 13 seconds to honor the 13 people shot and killed at Columbine High School on April 20th, 1999, the group walked to the Capitol where speakers lashed out at Republicans and the National Rifle Association. The organizers from schools in the D.C., Virginia, and Maryland region collected letters demanding gun control from protesters addressed to legislators and registered voters via text. But like the March for Our Lives protest last month and first National School Walkout on March 14th, the anti-gun walkout protest is being pushed and funded by Michael Bloomberg's Everytown for Gun Safety, which spawned the Students Demand Action group that participated on Friday. Looking to seize on activist outrage in the wake of the Florida school shooting, this is a Political's report. Everytown for Gun Safety, the group backed by former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg, is launching a 5-action plan to energize supporters ahead of the midterm elections. The 5 points of the plan are: pledge to vote on gun safety, research how much money local officials have accepted from National Rifle Association, register friends to vote, force candidates to go on the record about gun policy through a provided candidate questionnaire, and urge people who are involved to run for office themselves. Ian Berlin, 17, a student at a D.C. high school who told Breitbart News he organized the local protest, spoke from a small stage set up on the west lawn of the Capitol. Berlin said there are rules and regulations on the First Amendment, citing the permits the group needed to put on the protest. And so too must we regulate the Second Amendment, Berlin said. Just as freedoms of the First Amendment are subject to rules and regulations, so too must those protected under the Second. No amendment is absolute, Berlin said. Your right to a gun does not supersede my right to graduate high school. The teen noted that he was born shortly after the Columbine attack, and the government has taken no meaningful action to protect our schools and our communities from this epidemic of gun violence. So the politicians, I say, you've had 19 years and now you have until November, Berlin said. If you don't act, we will vote you out. Another teen, Maciela Latimer, 17, and a junior at Long Beach High School in Columbia, Maryland, said the anti-gun movement must be intersectional, a decades-old feminist social theory that asserts that people are often disadvantaged by multiple sources of oppression, their race, class, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, and other identity markers. Intersectionality recognizes that identity markers, e.g. female and black, do not exist independently of each other and that each informs the others often creating complex convergence of oppression. Latimer said that the people who died at Columbine and in Parkland, Florida, are not the only victims of gun violence. I am here because when black activists have taken to the street to protest police shootings, members of the law enforcement have responded in full riot gear and arrests, Latimer said, citing statistics she claims show that black men and Latinos are at much higher risk of dying from being shot. Now, let's keep this intersectional, Latimer said. The protesters also embraced the LGBT community and its link to gun violence, including suicide by a gunshot wound. A teen from a high school in Rockville, Maryland, said she wanted to share her identity and then pointed out that queer youth are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide than their cisgender heterosexual counterparts. As Breitbart News reported, the national school walkout was started by Lane Murdoch, a 16-year-old teen in Connecticut after the Florida shootings. But her efforts were also boosted by liberal adults, in Murdoch's case by the group Indivisible, which states on its website, "Our mission is to fuel a progressive grassroots network of local groups to resist the Trump agenda. In every congressional district in the country, people like you are starting local groups and leading local actions. Are you standing indivisible with us? Then sign up for weekly actions and updates." And Murdoch's activism has evolved since she came up with the idea to walk out of school for 17 minutes to honor the dead in Florida, according to an interview she did with National Public Radio. And she wants people to know that she's imagining this day to be very different than the March for Our Lives or the 17 minutes of silence on March 14 in honor of the victims of Parkland, Florida, NPR reported. This walkout will last from 10 a.m. through the end of the day. People ask me, like, why? Why all day? Murdoch said. That's because this is a topic that deserves more than 17 minutes, NPR reported. Why don't they, well, I think it would be good if they, walk out, but walk out in support of actually effective of measures to prevent these kinds of shootings in school. For example, protest against the school zone safety zones, gun-free, gun-free school zones, is it? What's the gun-free school zone act? Yeah, the Gun-Free School Zone Act. That would, in 1994, Congress introduced the Gun-Free Schools Act of 1994, which encouraged each state receiving federal funds for education to follow suit and introduce their own laws, now known as zero-tolerance laws. President Bill Clinton signed the Gun-Free Schools Act of 1994 into law on March 31st, 1990. But that's not the one that I'm looking for. I'm looking for the one in 1990, I think. Yeah, Gun-Free Schools Act of 1990. That was passed. That was the Gun-Free School Zones Act prohibited any unauthorized individual from knowingly possessing a loaded or unsecured firearm at a place that the individual knows or has reasonable cause to believe is a school zone, as defined by 18 U.S.C. 921A25. So protest against those laws, because those are the laws that are making schools unsafe. Yeah? Those are the laws that are making schools unsafe. It's not the NRA. And it's not, I'm not making a school zone unsafe by having my AR. There are, by one estimate, there are 8 million AR-15s in private hands in America today. It is the most popular rifle in America today. And what, 99.9999999% of those guns are being used safely and responsibly. It's not the guns that are making schools unsafe. It's not the NRA that are making schools unsafe. It is these crazy laws that are making schools unsafe. And you can look at it. You can look at the statistics. Talk about, before we were talking about the Colorado governor talking about marijuana use and crime statistics. Well, let's look at the prevalence of school shootings before and after these safety laws were enacted. And I think it'll be clear that these school shootings have been much more prevalent after these safety laws were enacted, after schools were made gun-free zones. So then let's go back and repeal those laws and see what happens then. See what happens then. But kids are being misled by their leftist Pied Pipers, and so they're coming up with these solutions that are not real solutions. That they're actually the NRA is providing education and training for people, and so it is actually one of the organizations that is working in favor of school safety. It's unfortunate that that message is not getting through. All right, let's take a break, and we'll come back with our REMAs after a 5-minute break. Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, April 21st, 2018. Tim Elder sitting in for the second Kim Chun-Guk. And by the way, some people I understand have expressed willingness to be here with me on Saturdays or Wednesdays, and so come on over. No one's stopping you. I think I'm not going to ask people to I don't have the heart to ask people to be here at like 5 o'clock in the morning. So, but, if you are moved or if you are inspired to be here, come on over and we'll put you on camera and you can be here and you can help out. Anyway, I'm at Mark 12 this morning for the Rima, the Bible Rima. And Jesus is talking in parables. And let's look at what he says. And he began to speak unto them by parables. A certain man planted a vineyard and set a hedge about it. A hedge, a wall. A wall. Yes, President Trump, there's a wall in the Bible. Yeah. A certain man planted a vineyard and set a hedge about it, and digged a place for the wine fat, and built a tower, and let it out to husbandmen, and went into a far country. Immediately a hedge about it. That means that this is an area of sovereignty, And at the season he sent to the husbandman a servant, that he might receive from the husbandman of the fruit of the vineyard. Yeah. And they caught him and beat him and sent him away empty. And again he sent unto them another servant, and at him they cast stones and wounded him in the head, and sent him away shamefully handled. And again he sent another, and him they killed, and many others, beating some and killing some. Having yet therefore one son, his well-beloved, he sent him also last unto them, saying, They will reverence my son. But those husbandmen said among themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance shall be ours. Dun, 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 dun. And they took him and killed him, and cast him out of the vineyard. What shall therefore the Lord of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the husbandman, and will give the vineyard unto others. And have ye not read this scripture, that the stone which the builders rejected is become the head of the corner? This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. So that was the parable that Jesus gave at that time. It's pretty, I think it was pretty obvious to the scribes and Pharisees who were listening to this that when he talked about servants, he was talking about the prophets that God sent, in which the Jewish people manhandled and sometimes killed. And finally God sent his son, his only begotten son, was Jesus. But then the husbandman, that is the clergy, said to themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and the inheritance shall be ours. Wow. Verse 7 that I just read is certainly resonates a great deal with us, doesn't it? That Father appointed his heir to the vineyard, but the clergy, the leaders, especially of the Korean church, the leaders of the American church are basically just, they're servants of servants. They don't even speak Korean. They have no idea what's going on in Korea. People like Tom Walsh, who was on the Supreme Council, may think that he understands what's going on. He doesn't have a clue. And he can't have a clue because he's not in the sort of the off-stage discussions that are going on, where decisions are actually being made. Anyway, so the Korean leaders in the Cheonjeonggung and other places, were plotting, apparently centering on Kim Sok-byung, who declared in public that he did not join the Church of Reverend Sung Myung-moon. He joined the Church of Hak Ja-han. When he joined, he did not join because of a true father. He joined because he considered himself always from the beginning to be a follower of Hak Ja-han. And as the sort of the head of in the Communist Party we would call it the Propaganda Bureau, as the head of the eyepiece TV, head of all the sort of the media or the church official media, the photography and this kind of thing. He was in a powerful position. He was in a position where he had daily access to True Father and to Hak Ja-han, and he used that access to gain the confidence of Hak Ja-han, and especially in the what was kind of crucial, I think, to his climb to power was the helicopter accident, where everyone was focused on getting Father out of the helicopter as quickly as possible, and then up the hill, away from the helicopter as it was burning. But Kim Sok-byung focused on Hak Ja-han, and he carried her on his back. And so apparently she credits him with saving her life, or anyway, apparently she thinks that way. And so, especially from that time on, he became a very powerful figure among those who were plotting to take over the church and take over Father's foundation as soon as he would pass. And so they started, even before Father's passing, started to look at ways where they could change Father's words and take over the blessing and so forth. And I remember now, sometimes you think back and you realize that something that someone said that sort of struck you as a little bit strange, but you didn't really pursue it at that time. But now you think back and realize that, yeah, that's what he was talking about. So I remember in August of 2012, I guess late August or something like that, second half of August, there was a point where, Father, by the solar calendar, passed on September 3rd. But in sometime in later part of August, 2012, it became clear to Kukjinim and to Hyungjinim that plans needed to be initiated for a funeral service, a Songhwa service for a true father. And there was a moment where, of course, as his son, as Father's son, Kukjinim wanted to, and as the head of the Tongyo Foundation, Kukjinim wanted to make sure that he and the second king were the center of these plans. Whereas in Cheongpyeong, there was another group, another force center, as you might say, power center, because Cheongpyeong never allowed itself to be placed under Kukjinim or the Tongyo Foundation or the church. So Cheongpyeong at that time was another separate independent power center. And there was some possibility that they might claim the right to prepare the funeral. But then it was reported at one point that that Han Mother said something like, well, let's see how well the Tongyang Foundation and the church are able to prepare. Let's see how well they're able to do. Let's sort of let them go ahead and prepare. And the Han Mother was sort of reserving the right to see what preparations were made, and then at the last minute perhaps cancel those and go to whatever the Cheongpyeong Power Center might have prepared. Anyway, that was reported to Kukchinim, that Mother had said this. But now I think back and I realize that basically what the Cheongpyeong Power Center and Kim Sung-pyong had decided to do was to go ahead and let Kukchinim and the second king go ahead and let them do all the funeral planning while they pursued their plot for a coup d'etat. They were too busy, to plan a funeral, because they were planning a coup d'etat. And they were not just planning; they had already planned it. They were executing a coup d'etat, and they were rounding up their forces to take over. And so even before the funeral, there was a meeting where in the Cheonjeonggung, which I attended, where the Han Mother announced that God would no longer be called God, but would be called by this name that that Family Federation is using now, which I will not repeat here. And that was sort of the first salvo of the coup d'etat, as you might say. The first firing of that coup d'etat against father and against his heir. And I would say the next one would be the meeting that took place, I guess, maybe it was the same meeting, maybe it was after, I'm not exactly sure, where the Han Mother, again in the same room in Cheonjeonggung, in the room that father used for his hundokhaes, again, Han Mother presiding over a meeting where she had people go around and give their impressions of the mourning period. It must have been after, because it must have been after the actual Songhua. So it must have been a separate meeting. Yes, it was. Now that I think about it, where she went around, she named certain people, about, what is it, how many people fit in that room? About 150 or so. And I was one of them again. And she had people go around and give their sort of impressions of the events. And people talked about how, many congressmen had attended, people had come from overseas, how tens of thousands of people had gone through the line in an orderly fashion, and how tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. There were two locations, one at in the gymnasium down at the bottom of the hill, and then some at the top. So it must have been hundreds of thousands down at the bottom, because we had thousands of people coming through at the top of the hill. I was, of course, following Kukchinim around everywhere he went, because that was my job. And so when it was, and different members of the True Family would take turns greeting the mourners who came to view Father's body in the actual palace. And so when Kukchinim was on duty, I was there with him, and he would do several hours at a time up there, and then also several hours at a time down at the bottom of the hill, greeting mourners down there as well. And we had thousands of people going through daily at the top of the hill, and there were about 10 days or so, I guess. 10 or so days. It was, the whole mourning period was 13 days, but the actual number of days where people could view Father's body at the top of the hill was about 10 days or so, I think, not the entire 13 days, because, there was a preparation period and stuff like that. And each day there were literally thousands of people. We had to limit the number of people who would come through because, well, for various reasons. So it was over that morning period, tens of thousands of people were able to view Father's body. So it must have been hundreds of thousands who came through the lines at the bottom of the hill to offer their respects in the gymnasium at the bottom of the hill. So it was logistically, it was quite an operation, because it's in the middle of the mountains, and there was only one road. So, and people were being bussed in, and of course other people were coming by cars. So to get those buses in and out was quite a logistic operation, and people were, lining up, and they were in line for hours. It was quite an operation. And so during this meeting, some of the leaders who were named by the Han Mother to speak pointed this out, how this logistic operation was carried out very successfully. And the flowers were incredibly beautiful. I don't know if you've seen photographs of that ceremony, but there was a professional flower sort of arranging company came in from Japan, and of course it cost a lot of money, but they brought, they came in with tens of thousands of flowers that were arranged in an incredibly beautiful manner. It was the most incredible flower arrangement or flower sort of presentation that I think I've ever seen. And I doubt very much that I'll ever see anything as beautiful like that in terms of flower arranging ever again. So that was, some people spoke about that. And, and also there were, of course, Songhai mourning events taking place around the world. And the second king traveled to Pyongyang during this mourning period, to accept the official mourning of the North Korean government and also Father's relatives who were still alive at that time in North Korea. I believe they've passed away in the meantime. So that was also something, because the second king became one of the very, very few people in the world who, as civilians, not as government officials, but as civilians, traveled from Seoul to Pyongyang by land. That's an incredibly rare thing to happen. And the second king became one of the very few civilians to be allowed to do that. To do that, you have to have permission from the UN command on the south, and also the North Korean government and whatever their military command is on the north. Both sides have to agree, and both sides have to give permission for that to happen. And this was done for the second king specifically, and only on that occasion, for this civilian to travel that way. The general route for civilians to travel to Pyongyang is to go through Beijing, or sometimes through Vladivostok. Anyway, so that also happened, and that was a very impressive and historic thing to happen during the mourning period. So some people spoke about that. But then at the end, the Han Mother said, yeah, but, you guys missed the most important thing. And everybody's wondering, what is the most important thing? And she said, the most important thing is that my mother, who's in the spirit world, you understand, my mother built that gymnasium. She was speaking, of course, her mother, Daemonim. Hongsune is her name, and Daemonim is the title that Father gave her. Working through, what's her name? I forgot now. Kim Hyunam. How soon we forget. Kim Hyunam raised the money to and designed and built this gymnasium. And I remember the Han Mother saying, think what it would have been like if that gymnasium had not been built. We would have to have had this ceremony in some hotel someplace, maybe in the middle of Seoul or someplace, And sitting there, I was, kind of surprised and I thought it odd. At this point, you understand, I was still loyal to the Han mother. And I thought some things were strange, but I was definitely giving her the benefit of the doubt. But I thought it strange that she would focus on that kind of an external thing, as opposed to the tremendous outreach that had been done, especially the outreach that had been done to the congressmen and government officials in preparation for this, and the fruits of that outreach that had been demonstrated by their coming to this event. But anyway, this was her insistence that her mother, and of course she was wrong. It was not her mother. It was not Mrs. Hyung Sune, but all that was done by Father's blessing, and it was the power of Father's blessing that brought about the success of Cheongpyeong and the donations to Cheongpyeong. If Father had not blessed that, the Japanese members would not have donated. This was primarily a Japanese thing, okay, because Americans and Koreans, compared to the Japanese, donated a very minuscule amount to Cheongpyeong. I know the individuals have donated everything they can and everything they could, but compared to the Japanese, it's a minuscule amount. The Japanese would not have donated to Cheongpyeong unless it had had true Father's blessing. So it was not, the credit did not go to Mrs. Hyung Sune or Daemonim. But this was Han Mother's point at that time. So that was, I think you could say, the second salvo that I can remember of this coup d'etat that I was aware of. All right, that I was aware of. I mean, there were many things going on that I was not aware of. And the second king talks about how he and other members of the true family were called in and sort of asked, "Who do you think I am?" And the second king answered, "Oh, you're the victorious true mother," and so forth. And she said, "No, that I am God." And the second king was very astonished and said, "No, don't say that." This kind of thing. So these kinds of things were going on in the background that I and others, other sort of blessed center families, were completely unaware of. I was maybe physically fairly close to Kukjinim at that time, but no matter how close you were, there were certain lines that were not crossed. So anyway, the second salvo that I was aware of, and then the third salvo I think that I was aware of was on, and the second king says he cannot confirm this, but my recollection is that he was dismissed as the head of the Korean church on September 30th, which also happened to be the Chuseok Day in Korea that year, in 2012. I can't remember how I heard about this, but on that day, and I was not present for this, but on that day, I understand the Han Mother gathered regional leaders from around the country and sort of senior members and to the Cheonjonggung Palace, and she instructed them to remove him as the head of the Korean church, and they did so. And I think that is where things really started to, where my loyalty to her really started to crumble. I would say that I could see that she was, by that time I think I was beginning to see that she was going on her own direction. And one of those two meetings that I mentioned already, she made the point that she was different from Father. And she made the point that Father was loving. Father related to you with love, but I'm not going to be like that. Something like that. So she already stated that she was going to be very different. And she started using this analogy that Father's words were like an unpolished diamond and she was going to polish them. Those kinds of statements were coming out then. And I didn't really understand what she meant by that at that time, but obviously now she meant that she was going to edit them and to change them to her liking. She had already, as we know, as we didn't know then, but know now, she had already, in the months before that, gone down to Songhwa-sa and forced them to republish some of the later volumes that contained Father's words that were critical of her and of Korean leaders who were under her wing, so to speak. She had Songhwa, the publishing company, the church's publishing company, which had already sent out all these volumes, recall the ones that had the offending passages, recall them all, and republish them after censoring these passages that she did not approve of. This was done even while Father was still in his physical body. So that was what it turns out she meant by polishing the diamond. Or cutting the diamond, or whatever, whatever the correct expression is. And then, in October, I think she was talking more and more about taking direct control over certain organizations. And then I had my meeting with her on November 15th, which I've talked about already a number of times previously. And then at the end of the year, very end of the year, around maybe December 30 or 31 or somewhere around there was a Songhwa ceremony in Japan for Mr. Kajikuri, who had been the president of the Japanese church during the time that Kukjinim was helping Japan go up against the kidnapping issue, and also the government. Basically, the government was about to kind of really come down hard on the church, and so Kukjinim was there helping to reform the church there, so that the government would not come down and not starting arresting people, not start arresting or not actually closing the church. Mr. Kajikuri was head of the church during that time. And he was always ill, and he was ill when he took the job. He was terminally ill when he took the job. It was always a question of how long he could actually serve in that position. And at one point, Mr. Kajikuri actually said to Kukjinim, well, basically, in a Japanese indirect way, told Kukjinim, I'm about to die, please appoint my successor. But he didn't die, and he continued much longer than anyone, his doctors or himself or anyone expected. But then in December of 2012, towards the end of 2012, he passed away, and his Songhwa ceremony was held probably the 30th or 31st of December at the headquarters church in Japan. And Kukjinim attended and gave what basically turned out to be his farewell speech. And Kukjinim had a sense of what the Han Mother was up to. After he returned to Korea, the Han Mother gave instruction that he should no longer go to Japan. That she said, I will handle Japan directly. As she had been saying, I will handle this directly, I will handle this directly, I will handle this directly. So she was sort of gathering all power, centralizing all power in herself. And in early January, she announced that, or not announced, but she gave instruction that Kukjinim was no longer to go to Japan. And apparently, now that I think about it, Kukjinim realized that this was coming, and so when he spoke at that Songhwa ceremony, he gave basically what was his farewell address to the Japanese members. And he said that the Japanese church needed to become a church that served the needs of its members, that a church that, first of all, found out what those needs were, and then fulfilled those needs, served those needs, and a church that reduced the donation burden of members, I think he may have given us a figure, something like, reduce it by 10% a year or 20% a year, something like that. I'm not sure about that. I have to go back and look at those remarks that he gave. But anyway, he was, and he said that Father had said, he communicated that Father had said that the indemnity that must be paid by the Japanese was over. That was over. And that the Japanese were freed from this. He gave that statement during that address, as I recall. But anyway, he was relieved of that responsibility as soon as he returned to Korea, a responsibility towards Japan. And things got, stranger and stranger. So in January, I stopped donating to the Family Federation. I was still working for the Tongyo Foundation at that time, and Kukjinim still was as well. And I was still his full-time translator. But then in the beginning of March, Kukjinim came to America. And he had been coming to America on a regular basis during the time that he was working in Korea, because he still had his business here. And this was the agreement that he had with Father, that he would work for Father in Korea. But Father would be okay with him coming back to America, from time to time to continue to run his company here, the Salo and the Car Arms company here. And so he left Korea and returned to the U.S. Sometime at the beginning of March, as I recall, on what, I and others on the staff, I guess, assumed was just another one of those trips. But that turned out to be his, well, he never returned to Korea after that. On March 23rd, I think, well, I guess during the March then, there was, after he left, immediately after he left, there was a move initiated to remove him as the chairman of the board of the Tongyo Foundation. Now, according to the bylaws of the Tongyo Foundation, meetings of the board could be called by the chairman. And it was up to the chairman to determine the time and place of these meetings. There were 7 members of the board, and a majority of those members could get together and demand that the chairman call a meeting. That was their right. If they could get 4 people together out of the 7, they could demand that a meeting be called. But according to the bylaws, it was still the chairman's prerogative to decide the time and place of such a meeting. So in March, 4 members of the board made such a demand. And obviously, and I think in the beginning it was not made clear, but later on they did make it clear that the purpose of this meeting was to vote to remove the chairman. So under the bylaws, it was Kukjinim's duty to call this meeting for his removal. But it was his prerogative to determine when and where this meeting would be held, within a certain period, I think. And so he called the meeting. He called the meeting in, near the Car Arms headquarters in New York at a certain time, on a Saturday. I believe it was March 23rd. And the 4 people said, no, we're going to have this. We want this meeting to happen in the Cheonjong Palace. And they were apparently under instruction from Han Mother to have this meeting in the palace under her watchful eye, because she wanted to make sure that they did what that she wanted them to. And but Kukjinim did not budge. So So on March 23rd, a strange thing happened. The four rebels, the four betrayers, went to the Cheonjeonggung Palace, and three loyal members of the board came to America and gathered at a hotel near the Car Arms headquarters, head office. And obviously, the one over here, the three people did not have a quorum. Okay, so but the four people, they had a quorum, they had a majority there, but it was a meeting that had not been called by the chairman, so it was a meeting that was not legal by the bylaws. But they went ahead and voted, passed a resolution on their part to remove the chairman. And then on Monday, I think, they went down to the government office that records these things and recorded that resolution. Now, so it was an illegal meeting by which they voted to remove Kuk Chinim. Now, Kuk Chinim got his title from True Father, and he was chairman of the Tongyu Foundation, not because he had been voted in, not by the authority of the board, but he was the chairman of the Tongyu Foundation by authority of True Father. And True Father never removed him. And so under heavenly law, Kuk Chinim is still, to this day, chairman of the Tongyu Foundation, the legitimate chairman of the Tongyu Foundation. And the people who are running the Tongyu Foundation today are usurpers. Under heavenly law, I'm just saying. Under Korean law, under secular law, yes, even though that meeting was illegal, still it was registered, and the government office accepted the registration. I mean, 4 out of 7 people voted to remove the chairman. So, and the government, the explanation that the lawyers gave us at that time, the government office does not go into the details of the bylaws and so forth to determine whether or not this meeting was legal. And if Kuk Chinim wanted to challenge that, he would have to hire his own lawyers and go up against the Tongyu Foundation to recover his position under secular law, and which he chose not to do. So anyway, that happened in March, and so Kuk Chinim was removed by under secular law. At least he was removed as chairman of the Tongyu Foundation, and Pak No-hee, the younger brother of Bo-hee Pak, Pak No-hee was put in that position in his place. But he was a usurper, and the 4 people were usurpers who voted that. So today, guess who is chairman of the Tongyu Foundation? I believe it's Kim Sok-byung. I think Choi Yoon-gi had a stint, had a term for a time, I think, but I think now it's the original usurper, Kim Sok-byung, I think now is in that position, the head of what used to be Eyepiece TV. So this sort of the leader of the coup d'etat now is in that position. I believe that's correct. I haven't really been following the comings and goings of the leadership changings in Family Federation too closely, but I think that's what's going on today. So these usurpers are in charge of that, and they are, of course, the same can be said with the second king. Father put him in charge of the Korean church, and Father never removed him. So again, the current leaders of the Korean church are usurpers, and of course, the second king fired them all anyway in 2015, February, I believe, beginning when he fired a lot of people in one of his sermons then. So anyway, that is my thoughts on the parable of the vineyard, where the husbandmen or actually in this case in the parable, actually kill the heir to make the inheritance theirs. So they have chased out the heir and to make the inheritance theirs. And we shall see. Yeah. So what happens here? what shall therefore the Lord of the vineyard do? He will come and destroy the husbandman, and will give the vineyard unto others. So that's it. That's it. That's it. In the Cheonseongyung, I am in the book on the restoration of the homeland of the true God. And I'm in chapter 2, section 4.2. Home church is the place where the providence is finally settled. So this is, home church is the vineyard, I guess, huh? Finally settled. The fact I have declared such an event is a gigantic leap in providential history. If you are victorious in home church, what will that make you? When that time comes, you will be messiahs, here with a small m. And I think that's the way the translators have put it, and I think that's correct. You will become tribal messiahs, and from there you will be the persons responsible to face the people and save them. How do you reach perfection? And here I would rather say, how do you reach completion? I think there's a difference between perfection and completion, all right? And, you know, the Korean word wansong is sometimes translated as perfection, sometimes as completion, but I really, the more I think about it, the more I prefer completion. Anyway, how do you reach completion? In other words, how do I make myself complete? Complete meaning, how do I, anyway, how do I make myself complete? How do I make myself to match the design that Father God had for me at the beginning? All of you have parents, children, and things of creation. Home church is the place to develop these things. Because Adam fell, he lost these three things. We must find these three things and offer them to God. We should find what was lost, and let me turn the page here and then increase the magnification here again, and offer it through the true parents to God. And here I would put true parents in the singular here, to offer it through the true parent to God. Wow. Yeah, okay, yeah. Through 참부모님을 통해서 하나님 앞에. So, 참부모를 통해서. Okay, yeah. So through the true parent, I would say, we need to go through God. We have to find the things that we lost, offer them up to God, and inherit them again from Him as our parent. You see the problem that the translator faces here? He says, I just said it in the singular, but the translator here has it in the plural, and obviously that cannot be right. Anyway, let's not go. Let's not. Okay, you get the point. You should know that if you offer everything to God, your house will be built, and your world will come about. The foundation for that is home church. This is a sacrifice. This is an altar, a place where you present your three offerings. Okay. All right, these words were spoken in 1978. Yes. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving us the home church providence. I know that some people around the world have done very well in this providence, but I think the vast majority of people, blessed center families, have not. We need to go back and read this book, I would say, on, and especially this chapter, Home Church as the Internal Foundation of the Providence, to go back and read that. I was on pages 2036 and 2037 there. All right, let's take a break, and we'll come back with some news from the Cheonju Group Providence, Cheonju Group perspective. Providence as well.
folks. And look at what I've got here today. My God, take a look at this. This is a BFR in 454 Casull with an octagonal barrel, magna porting, micarta grips. And look at that, it even has my initials on it, JM. Look at that thing of beauty, my God. Pop open the cartridge insertion door, and look at that cylinder spin. The finest revolvers in the world. That's a cannon. That's a cannon. Oh, man. Pretty accurate, though. That's our target. Oh boy! Massive repo.
Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, April 21st, 2018. And I want to go to an article now about the troubles of the Broward County Sheriff. Of course, Broward County, of course, being the place in Florida where that terrible massacre took place at that high school on February 14th, Valentine's Day. Broward Sheriff's Office Deputies Association schedules no confidence vote for Israel. That's Israel being the name of the sheriff. Union president cites malfeasance, lack of leadership under sheriff. The second king has called for the resignation of Sheriff Israel, and he hasn't done that. And the words of the second king have power, because then spirit world takes their marching orders from that. And so let's look at what's happening here. Disappointed with the Broward Sheriff's handling of the Parkland school shooting, the county's largest deputies union has scheduled a no-confidence vote for Scott Israel. Israel fired back late Friday, calling the decision unfortunate and appalling, and characterizing the move as a bargaining tactic to extort the county into giving the deputies a pay raise. Deputy Jeff Bell, who also serves as president of Broward Sheriff's Office Deputies Association, said in a statement Friday the move follows many instances of suspected malfeasance, misfeasance, failure to maintain fiduciary responsibility by the sheriff, failure to properly investigate possible criminal conduct by members of his senior command staff, and the lack of leadership that has crushed morale throughout the agency. Bell said how Israel handled the mass shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School prompted the vote. The Broward Sheriff Office Deputies Association represents 1,325 deputies, more than half of the county's 2,560 certified deputies. He's not sticking up for us. He's not telling his citizens this is an isolated incident, Bell told Local 10 Friday. We are not taking any responsibility for the Stoneman Douglas shooting. There is no responsibility and no leadership. The association is taking up the vote with their members starting at 6 p.m. Friday, so that would be yesterday evening, when electronic ballots will go out. The ballots will be open until Thursday. So they're in the process now of doing this, a week-long process. It is unfortunate and appalling that the IUPA union boss in the midst of ongoing labor contract salary negotiations, is trying to use the Parkland tragedy as a bargaining tactic to extort a 6.5% pay raise from BSO through this vote of no confidence ploy, Israel said in a statement. The county's other police union, the Broward County Police Benevolent Association, sought to distance itself from the no confidence vote. This is the work of another union and does not represent how the members of PBA feel, said Bob Laheff, director of BSO Membership Services. We will let the Florida Department of Law Enforcement investigation continue and not jump to judgment as others have done. Israel has been widely criticized for his agency's response to the Valentine's Day mass shooting that left 17 people dead. The sheriff has rejected calls to resign, including from State Representative Bill Hager, a Republican of Boca Raton. Israel, who was elected sheriff in 2012, told CNN in the aftermath of the shooting that he displayed amazing leadership. Okay, so that is something that I think we are still. I think people in Blessed Central families in Florida are still planning some kind of an event to encourage Sheriff Israel to take responsibility and resign for the terrible way that the law enforcement handled that incident. I mean, people talk about mental illness and everything like that. The guy should have been arrested. Let's not use his name because these people really feed off of the notoriety that they give and that they get from these incidents. So let's not use his name. But the guy who did the shooting, should have been arrested. I mean, not for mental incapacity, but he should have been arrested when he pointed a loaded gun in someone's head. He should have been arrested when he said online that he wanted to carry out a mass shooting. So he committed crimes that would have led to his arrest, and that would have led to his not being able to acquire weapons or to have weapons. So that's how that situation should have been handled. And of course, the no gun zone around the school didn't help either. And this is what the kids who were walking out yesterday, should have been focusing on as well. The responsibility of law enforcement. They wanted to keep the crime statistics low so as to get more money from the federal government. And that is the scandal that is here. And it's not the NRA at all, and not the 8 million AR-15 owners in America today. All right. Let's, I guess we're kind of obliged to look at this thing with North Korea saying it's going to freeze its missile tests. And I understand Trump wants to take credit. All right, so let's see what he tweeted. I don't understand this tweet here. The timestamp on this tweet is actually in the future, not the past. 7:50 a.m., 21 April 2018. Anyway, that's not. Anyway, go on. North Korea has agreed to suspend all nuclear tests and close up a major test site. This is very good news for North Korea and the world. Big progress. Look forward to our summit, President Trump said in a tweet. What else does he say? And he says 8 hours ago, a message from Kim Jong-un, North Korea will stop nuclear tests and launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Also will shut down a nuclear test site in the country's northern side to prove the vow to suspend nuclear tests. Progress being made for all. So that's... Yeah. So anyway, North Korea, has always talked a good talk, but they don't do the walk. Anyway, Fox News has a story. North Korea announces end to missile testing as Trump cites big progress. And so the media is also excited about this, as if progress is being made. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un announced Friday that his country will be suspending missile testing and closing a nuclear test site. Several reports said from April 21, North Korea will stop nuclear tests and launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Korean Central News Agency said, according to Yonhap News, the North will shut down a nuclear test site in the country's northern side to prove the vow to suspend nuclear tests. The announcement comes amid preparations for a meeting later this year between President Trump and North Korean dictator. During the summit, Trump said he expected to talk with Kim about denuclearizing the Hermit Kingdom. North Korea has agreed to suspend all nuclear tests and close up a major test site, Trump tweeted. Following the announcement, this is a very good news from North Korea and the world. Big progress. Look forward to our summit. News of the testing suspension follows the revelation earlier this week that Mike Pompeo, the current CIA director and Secretary of State nominee, met with Kim in North Korea over Easter weekend to lay the groundwork for the prospective meeting with Trump. The meeting, Trump said, could occur by early June. Trump said Pompeo's meeting went very smoothly and said a good relationship was formed. Denuclearization will be a great thing for the world, but also for North Korea, he said. Yeah, it'll be good for North Korea. It will not be good for Kim Jong-un. And this is what Kim Jong-un is most interested in. You got to understand, Kim Jong-un is not interested in North Korea. He's interested in himself. So, he will starve the country to death for his own sake to maintain his regime. He's not interested in North Korea. And I don't know if Trump understands this. Because we all, people tend to look at things through their own experiences and their own prisms. And so, for example, living in a country like the United States, we tend to think that political parties are sort of, not really part of the government, or at least are under the government. We don't realize that in communist countries, for example, the Communist Party is the overarching thing there, and then under the Communist Party, you have the government. It's the political arm of the Communist Party, and the military is the political arm, the military arm of the Communist Party, that kind of a thing. And so, also in the case of a dictator in a country like North Korea, they are not patriotic in the sense that we think of patriotism. They are interested in preserving their regime. They are interested in preserving their 3 meals a day, all right? And interested in preserving their bodyguards and the military that surrounds them and protects them from the populace. So, yes, I agree with Trump that denuclearization will be great for North Korea. But Kim Jong-un is not interested in what is great for North Korea. He is interested in what is great for Kim Jong-un. So that is the caveat that Kim Jong-un attached to that. I hope we have a very successful meeting, Trump said during a joint news conference alongside Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Okay, this is a story. Actually, sometimes they take stories that are a few days old and they just change the top and rerun them, and that's what's happening here with that paragraph. North Korea's decision Friday was made in a meeting of the ruling party's Central Committee, during which Kim, according to the Korean Central News Agency, said nuclear development has proceeded scientifically and in due order, and the development of the delivery strike means also proceeded scientifically and verified the completion of nuclear weapons. We no longer need any nuclear test or test launches of intermediate and intercontinental range ballistic missiles, and because of this, the Northern Nuclear Test Site has finished its mission, he said. See, so Kim Jong-un is saying, job done, mission accomplished, basically what he's saying, mission accomplished. And so he's closing it for that reason, and also to, throw a few crumbs to the Western media. North Korea also vowed to actively engage with regional neighbors and international community to secure peace in the Korean Peninsula and create an optimal international environment to build its economy. The country's diplomatic outreach in recent months came after a flurry of weapons tests, including the underground detonation of a possible thermonuclear warhead and 3 launches of developmental intercontinental ballistic missiles designed to strike the U.S. mainland. So what Kim Jong-un is saying, though, is that we've completed the development of our nuclear weapons, and now we're going to keep our nuclear weapons. This is what he's saying. Listen to what he's saying. Read it here. Nuclear development has proceeded scientifically and in due order, and the development of the delivery strike means also proceeded scientifically and verified the completion of nuclear weapons. So we've completed that. We've done that. So we no longer need any nuclear test or test launches. Because of this, the northern nuclear site has finished its mission. All right. So he's not giving any hint at all that he's going to denuclearize here. He's saying, yeah, we've got what we needed, and so we don't need to test anymore. We've got what we needed. Yeah. And he's going to say, we need what we got. He's not going to denuclearize. I hope people are reading these statements carefully. And he means what he says. He's going to keep those nuclear weapons. That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying. So don't get excited about the fact that he's freezing the tests. He's not going to test anymore. He's bowing down to President Trump. Absolutely not at all. Not at all. Not at all. Oh boy. I hope I hope Trump doesn't go in there with the rose-colored glasses or anything. And I hope that he is true to his word, that if things don't go the way he thinks they should, I think he will absolutely get up and walk out. Get up and walk out of that meeting. Oh boy. I almost wish I could be there with him. Almost wish I could be. I'm not wishing it. I'm almost wishing it, all right? I'm not actually wishing it. Hey. Sometimes you just have to get up and leave. And I think Trump needs to be willing to do that. Let's look at Breitbart's take on this. See what they're saying. Various reports in the American South Korean state media Friday. I like the way they say South Korean state media. Actually, that's true. Yonhap is a state media organization, actually, but it's not often said. But yeah, it's not an independent news organization. It is owned by the state. South Korean state media Friday evening indicated that North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un announced the halt of nuclear missile tests in his country. The reports did not specify whether the tests would conclude permanently. South Korean newswire service Yonhap reports that the Korean Central News Agency published the announcement from Kim, which read, from April 21, North Korea will stop its nuclear tests and launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles. The North will shut down a nuclear site in the country's northern side to prove the vow to suspend nuclear tests, the announcement concluded. North Korean News, NK News, a website focusing on updates from the communist country, reported that Kim told a Workers' Party of Korea meeting that there was no need for such a nuclear program anymore. Reuters also confirmed. Sputnik, a Russian state site, added a detail: North Korea will join international efforts to halt nuclear tests altogether, according to Kim. Maybe Kim Jong-un doesn't understand that in order to maintain a nuclear force, you have to have continual testing. This is an important part of having a nuclear force. Maybe Kim Jong-un doesn't understand that. The announcement follows the debut of a historic direct hotline between Kim and South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who will meet Kim next Friday in the border town of Panmunjom. It's not a town, all right? Don't stop calling it a town. It's not a peace town. It's not a border town. It's not a peace village. It's not a town. Nobody lives there. The two nations agreed to a live broadcast of the summit, which means that nothing will happen, which reports have indicated would focus on the possibility of ending the Korean War, technically still ongoing despite being at a stalemate, and the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, a phrase that some have speculated North Korea will interpret to mean a diminished U.S. presence on the site. Kim reportedly told South Korean officials in a March meeting that denuclearization was Father Kim Jong-il's dying wish. North Korea remains the world's most prolific human rights abuser, strictly punishing citizens with death or extended labor camp sentences for attempting to access Western media. Christian North Koreans, or those caught within the vicinity of Bibles, are routinely imprisoned and tortured. North Koreans are forced into a strict caste system known as songbun, in which multiple generations of families can be punished for poverty, should any one member be suspected of opposing the Kim regime. Songbun means it's a communist term. And what would be ingredient would be the direct translation. Ingredient, for example, but anyway, in communism, it means the person's ideological purity. President Donald Trump is preparing to meet Kim in person at a summit in May or early June. According to the White House, no meeting between a U.S. leader and Kim dynasty dictator has occurred since Kim Il-sung founded the communist state in 1948. Yeah. So 48, well, that's 70 years. Yep, 70 years. Well, watch out. Watch out below. 70 years. You know what that means. Breitbart so goes into the human rights thing, and it also questions whether the suspension of a test is permanent. Obviously cannot be if they're going to maintain a nuclear force. But again, there's no hint here that they're actually going to denuclearize, except to say that denuclearization was Father Kim Jong-il's dying wish. But what did Kim Jong-il mean by denuclearization? What did he mean by that? He meant the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula meant that no nuclear weapons outside the peninsula that are capable of attacking the peninsula. So, U.S. Nuclear weapons in the U.S. and China actually also too, that are capable of attacking the Korean Peninsula would also be included in this denuclearization scheme of North Korea. So North Korea, when they use words, we have to understand that they have their own meaning. They have their own definitions of these words. And we need to be careful to understand those words in terms of the meanings that they give them, not according to the meanings that we give them. And this is a trap that Western negotiators often fall into when negotiating with communists. Democracy, for example, means something completely different to them. Freedom of religion means something completely different to them. I mean, in the Chinese Constitution, there's freedom of religion, but religions must be loyal to the Communist Party. So we need to understand. Also in North Korea, yeah. By the way, the largest unification church in the world is located in Pyongyang. I mean, largest in terms of the building size. Okay. Yeah, that's true. Father built the largest church in Pyongyang. And as far as I know, it's still there. It's inside the building. I've never been there. I've never been to Pyongyang. But I've seen photographs of this outside and inside. And inside, it is a regular church and unification church. And how shall I say, certain non-Korean people, blessed central families, who are assigned to, who work in Pyongyang, managing and maintaining True Father's assets there, attend services there. A gentleman I know pretty well was the Unification Church minister in Pyongyang for quite a number of years. I met him after he came back from that mission, after he and he was sharing with me some of his experiences there as a minister. Of course, Koreans are not allowed to worship there. I mean, they would be killed if they go in there. But non-Korean nationals who are Unification Church members and who work in Pyongyang in various functions do worship there. I've not had an update on that status of that church in a couple of years, so I can't say for sure that it's still there. But I believe it may very well be. But unfortunately, if it is still there, it's under the Family Federation now. So anyway, that's that. That is that. Okay, let's see. Why don't we take a break now, and I will come back with more stories from a Tony perspective after this. Welcome back to the King's Report for Saturday, April 21st, 2018. I'm Tim Elder, sitting in for the second King of Chanuk, Hyung Moon. Let's take a look at what's going on with these Comey memos. It turns out that Justice Department, a watchdog, wants to see whether the former FBI director leaked any classified information. This is a Wall Street Journal this morning. At least two of the memos that former FBI Director James Comey gave to a friend outside the government contained information that officials now consider classified, according to people familiar with the matter, prompting a review by the Justice Department's internal watchdog. Of those two memos, Mr. Comey himself redacted elements of one that he knew to be classified to protect secrets before he handed the documents over to his friend. He determined at the time that another memo contained no classified information, but after he left the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Bureau officials upgraded it to confidential, the lowest level of classification. The Justice Department Inspector General is now conducting an investigation into classification issues related to the Comey memos, according to a person familiar with the matter. Mr. Comey has said he considered the memos personal rather than government documents. He told Congress that he wrote them and authorized their release to the media as a private citizen. Mr. Comey gave 4 total memos to his friend Daniel Richman, a former federal prosecutor who is now a professor at Columbia Law School. People familiar with the matter said 3 were considered unclassified at the time, and the one that was classified contained the redactions made by Mr. Comey. As FBI Director, Mr. Comey had the legal authority to determine what Bureau information was classified and what wasn't. Once he left the government, however, the determination fell to other officials. The FBI deemed the memos classified sometime during 2017. One of the people familiar with the matter said, President Donald Trump has repeatedly accused Mr. Comey of mishandling classified information in a bid to discredit the former FBI director whom he fired last year. The public feud between the two men has intensified this week as Mr. Comey has granted several interviews while promoting a memoir that is highly critical of Mr. Trump. Quote, James Comey memos just out and show clearly that there was no collusion and no obstruction. Also, he leaked classified information. Wow! Will the witch hunt continue? Unquote, Mr. Trump wrote on Twitter Thursday. In interviews, Mr. Comey, he called Mr. Trump's in interviews, Mr. Comey has called Mr. Trump morally unfit to serve in the White House. He and Mr. Richmond didn't immediately respond to requests for comment. Quote, a person who sees moral equivalence in Charlottesville, who talks about and treats women like they're pieces of meat, and who lies constantly about matters big and small and insists the American people believe it, that person's not fit to be president of the United States on moral grounds, Mr. Comey told ABC News this month. The situation around Mr. Comey's handling of his memos is analogous to the investigation the FBI under his leadership conducted of Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton in 2016. While serving as a Secretary of State, Mrs. Clinton used a personal email server rather than a government account. After leaving government, thousands of her emails were determined to have contained classified information. Mrs. Clinton's defense was that they weren't classified at the time she circulated them and were only upgraded to classified later. A small number of her emails were determined to have been classified at the time they were sent. Mr. Comey's handling of the Clinton investigation drew criticism from both Republicans and Democrats. Republicans said Mrs. Clinton should have been charged, while Democrats said the investigation was without legal basis and was mishandled. Particularly Mr. Comey's decision to announce shortly before Election Day that he was reopening the probe. Mrs. Clinton lost the election to Mr. Trump. No charges were ever filed against Mrs. Clinton or her aides, and Mr. Comey said that his investigation found no evidence of intent to violate the laws governing the handling of classified information. But it was not necessary for him to find intent. All right? As Mr. Comey noted, so he could have and he should have charged her because intent was not a factor in determining whether or not to charge. Did she leak or did she not? If she did, she's charged. There's no question of intent doesn't come into play. But Comey made his decision ostensibly on the question of intent. As Mr. Comey noted in his statement explaining his decision not to bring charges against Mrs. Clinton, typically the Justice Department doesn't bring cases concerning mishandling of classified information unless there is some intent. careless, or inadvertent release of classified information is rarely prosecuted. Mr. Comey's memos were written contemporaneously to create a record of his interactions with Mr. Trump. He told Congress last year he hadn't kept written records of his interactions with previous presidents, but decided to do so with Mr. Trump because of the nature of the person. In other words, because he hated his guts. Mr. Trump has said he intended to get the information to the public through the media by giving the memos to Mr. Richmond, in part to prompt the appointment of a special prosecutor designed to continue the FBI's investigation without political interference. Quote, my judgment was, I need to get that out into the public square, unquote, Mr. Comey told Congress last year. I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter. Didn't do it myself for a variety of reasons. I asked him to because I thought that might prompt the appointment of a special counsel. Those memos formed the basis for Mr. Comey's testimony in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee last year, in which he accused the president of trying to shut down an investigation into purported Russian interference in the 2016 election. The president has denied trying to thwart the probe. Mr. Comey's tactics were successful. Special counsel Robert Mueller was appointed shortly after he was fired as FBI director. Mr. Comey's memos are now part of the wide-ranging probe being conducted by Mr. Mueller into Russian interference in the 2016 election, as well as into whether Mr. Trump obstructed justice when he fired Mr. Comey last year, allegations that Mr. Trump denies. Russia has denied interfering in the election. I was honestly concerned he might lie about the nature of our meetings, so I thought it important to document. That combination of things I had never experienced before, but had led me to believe I got to write it down in a very detailed way, Mr. Comey told the committee. The memos were given to Congress this week. They were reviewed by the Wall Street Journal and other media outlets. Much of the material in the memos has been previously disclosed in congressional testimony and Mr. Comey's book. All right, so that's the end of that article. Comey. He's an interesting character, isn't he? Interesting that this kind of a person should be at the center of a power of the United States government. But I guess, he's very much, he's the kind of person who rises, I think, to the top of a power structure because he watches out for himself and he will switch loyalties from this side to that side. So but pretty much now I think everybody hates him, Democrats and Republicans. So he's trying his best though to create some kind of a legacy for himself. Democrats are suing over Russia, Trump, and WikiLeaks. This is an article on CNBC. Democratic Party files suit alleging Russia, the Trump campaign, and WikiLeaks conspired to disrupt the 2016 election. Now it's a conspiracy. The Democratic Party on Friday sued President Donald Trump's presidential campaign, the Russian government, and WikiLeaks group, claiming a broad illegal conspiracy to help Trump win the 2016 election. The multi-million-dollar lawsuit filed in Manhattan federal court says that, quote, in the Trump campaign, Russia found a willing and active partner in this effort, unquote, to mount, quote, a brazen attack on American democracy, unquote, which included Russian infiltration of the Democratic Party computer network. The Trump campaign, according to the lawsuit, gleefully welcomed Russia's help. The suit said that pre-existing relationships with Russia and Russian oligarchs with Trump and Trump associates provided fertile ground for the Russia-Trump conspiracy. Wow, we have a bona fide left-wing conspiracy theory here. Yep. The common purpose of the scheme, according to the Democratic National Committee, was to bolster Trump and denigrate the Democratic Party nominee, Hillary Clinton, while boosting the candidacy of Trump, whose policies would benefit the Kremlin. Tom Perez, chairman of the Democratic National Committee, said the party's suit is not partisan, it's patriotic. Of course it's not partisan. If the occupant of the Oval Office won't protect our democracy, Democrats will. It is our obligation to the American people, Perez said. He called the alleged conspiracy an act of unprecedented treachery, the campaign of a nominee for president of the United States in league with a hostile foreign power to bolster its own chance to win the presidency. The DNC in 1972 had sued President Richard Nixon's election committee in connection with the break-in at the party headquarters in the Watergate building in Washington by burglars connected to the committee. The Nixon campaign settled that suit for $750,000 on the same day that Nixon resigned in disgrace in August 1974 as a result of his efforts to cover up White House ties to the Watergate burglars. The White House had no immediate comment on the new DNC suit. In a statement issued Friday afternoon, the Trump campaign called the lawsuit frivolous and a last-ditch effort to substantiate the baseless Russian collusion allegations by the nearly bankrupt Democratic Party. The civil lawsuit is completely without merit and will be dismissed in due time, the campaign said. The named defendants in the lawsuit include Trump's son Donald Trump Jr., his son-in-law Jared Kushner, former campaign chief Paul Manafort, and campaign officials Richard Gates and Trump's ally Roger Stone. Also named is the Russian Federation, the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, a Russian intelligence service hacker known as Guccifer 2.0, WikiLeaks and its leader Julian Assange, and 10 unidentified people. The suit says Russia is not entitled to sovereign immunity from the action because the claims stem from Russia's trespass onto the DNC's private servers to steal information. The DNC said that while it would be impossible, quote, to fully repair the harm caused by the defendants, the DNC has filed its civil complaint to hold the defendants accountable for their misconduct and to ensure transparency. The suit says that the Trump campaign solicited Russia's illegal assistance and maintained secret communications with people linked to the Russian government, including a spy agency tasked with attacking the DNC. The suit goes on to say that the Russian agents trespassed into the DNC's computer network and other electronic accounts, collected trade secrets and other private data, and then sent that information to WikiLeaks, a private group well known for publishing secret documents. The founder of WikiLeaks, Assange, shared the defendants' common goal of damaging the Democratic Party in advance of the election, according to the suit. Russia, using WikiLeaks, would disseminate information stolen from the Democrats at times when it would best suit the Trump campaign, the suit said. The lawsuit noted that as the stolen DNC information was released publicly, Trump openly praised the illegal disseminations and encouraged Russia to continue violations of U.S. law through its ongoing hacking campaign. Perez, the DNC chairman, in a prepared statement, said the Russian government notified the Trump campaign in advance that it had stolen Democratic emails and other information about plans by the party that Russia sought to support Trump's candidacy. Rather than reporting Russia's offer to meddle in the U.S. election, the Trump campaign welcomed Russia's help, Perez said. Trump's closest political advisor, Roger Stone, also appeared to have advanced knowledge of specific plans by WikiLeaks to disseminate some of the information. The suit's claims opened with the words, "No one is above the law." In the run-up to the 2016 election, Russia mounted a brazen attack on American democracy. The opening salvo was an attack on the DNC carried out on American soil. Okay, so then it goes here and it gives the Trump response, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so that is what the DNC is up to right now. It seems like they're trying, if one thing doesn't work, they try something else. And what is, I think, frustrating to them is that President Trump's public support does not seem to be affected by all this. I've been looking at the Rasmussen Report's daily presidential tracking poll the last several days, and what I see, I'm looking up the most the immediate most up-to-date one right now, and right now, let's see, the most here is. Okay, it's down right now. This is day before. This is 19 April, so that's day before yesterday, 48%. But it's been around the upper 40s, touching 50 and going into the lower 50s. So it appears not to be affected by all this. And on Friday, yesterday, it was up to 49%. The Rasmussen Report's daily presidential tracking poll for Friday shows that 49% of likely U.S. voters approve of President Trump's job performance, 50% disapprove. The latest figures include 33% who strongly approve on the way the president is performing and 42% who strongly disapprove. This gives him a presidential approval index rating of -9. Regular updates are posted Monday through Friday at 9:30 a.m. Fired FBI Director James Comey's new book and related media interviews don't seem to be winning any converts. Most voters say they're unlikely to read the book, perhaps in parts because they're closely divided over whether Comey's telling the truth or just taking a political shot at the president. 41% now agree with Trump's decision to fire Comey, up 5 points from last May, shortly after he was terminated as FBI director. 45% disagree with the firing of Comey, down from 51%. 14% are not sure. The Justice Department has reportedly recommended criminal charges against Andrew McCabe, Comey's number 2 man at the FBI, for lying to investigators about leaking to the media. 66% of Republicans and 50% of all voters believe senior federal law enforcement officials at the FBI and Justice Department broke the law in an effort to prevent Trump from winning the presidency in 2016. Even with Republicans now in charge of the White House and both chambers of Congress, most GOP voters still feel they don't have a voice in Washington, D.C. Democrats are happier with the representation they've got. Democrats continue to hold the lead on, Rasmussen reports, a generic congressional ballot. Okay. Is there a generic congressional ballot here? Well, I guess you have to go to a different page for that. So that's an interesting thing that President Trump's approval rating appears to be fairly solid. Just below 50%. Sometimes going above. Despite all, and that's considering everything that they've thrown at him, you would expect it to be down in the low 30s or something. Now here, this is an article that's perhaps a sign of the times. Yes, I'm running as a socialist. Candidates embracing the socialist label. And New York Times has an article on why that's true. New York Times. Houston, there was no question on primary night in Texas last month that Franklin Bynum would win the Democratic nomination to become a criminal court judge in Houston. The 34-year-old defense attorney had no challengers. But for his supporters who packed into a Mexican restaurant that evening, there was still something impressive to celebrate. Many in the crowd were members of the Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA, a group that has experienced an enormous surge of interest since the election of President Trump, even in conservative states. And Mr. Bynum was one of their own, a socialist who, along with at least 16 others, appeared on the ballot in primary races across the state of Texas. Yes, I'm running as a socialist, Mr. Bynum said. I'm a far-left candidate. Well, what I'm trying to do is be a Democrat who actually stands for something and tells the people, here's how we are going to materially improve conditions in your life. See, that is a socialist statement, how we are going to materially improve conditions in your life. The Chonyuguk culture statement would be, this is how we are going to improve the environment, the economic and social, especially the economic and legal environment, which will help you improve your own life materially. And Chonyuguk, in other words, what the government would do in Chonyuguk, first of all, to get rid of regulations, right, or most regulations, go through and 10% of laws each year would go into the wastebasket. And the primary role of government would be to operate a court system which would help in the protection of property rights and defend the country. Those two would be the main goals, main functions of government. And to keep the government out of the lives of individual citizens. But the socialism is a top-down false utopia. And so it is saying that if you give us power, we will improve your lives. If you give us power, concentrate power in me, give me power, and I will reward you. Rather than shy away from being called a socialist, a word conservatives have long wielded as a slur, candidates Mr. Bynum are embracing the label. He is among dozens of DSA members running in this fall's midterms for offices across the country at nearly every level. In Hawaii, Kaniela Ing, a state representative, is running for Congress. Gail McLaughlin, a former mayor of Richmond, California, is running to be the state's lieutenant governor. In Tennessee, Dennis Prater, an adjunct professor at East Tennessee State University, is running to be a county commissioner. Supporters, many of them millennials, say they are drawn by DSA's promise to combat income inequality. See, that's it. You know, the Chonyugu Constitution solves the problem of income inequality. There will always be inequality, of course, but to reduce that, we can reduce that inequality because big government breeds big business, because big business uses big government to keep small companies out of the market, to keep people to raise the barriers of entry into markets. You know, the lawyers that work for big business write regulations, submit these to the government, and then they come back in terms of laws or executive orders or regulations. It's the lawyers hired by the big businesses that write those laws and regulations to benefit big business. So if you want to combat income inequality, you've got to reduce the size of government. But socialism is the opposite. Socialism increases government, and it increases income inequality. Venezuela, yeah? North Korea, Soviet Union, any socialist country that you see, there's a huge gap in the material living standards of the party elite and the general population in the country, especially the rural population. Income inequality, which they believe is tainting every facet of American life, from the criminal justice system to medical care to politics. They argue that capitalism has let them down, saddling them with a student debt, high rent, and uncertain job prospects, and they have been frustrated by the Democratic Party, which they say has lost touch with working people. Outrage over rising inequality has simmered for years, erupting into Occupy Wall Street movement and the groundswell of support for Senator Bernie Sanders, a self-described democratic socialist, but it was the election of Mr. Trump that convinced tens of thousands that both parties were broken and that the country was in need of a radical fix. Well, that is true. Both parties are broken, and the country is in need of a radical fix. And probably chaos will erupt, I suspect. And I suspect that the United States will be engulfed in chaos, and that a radical fix will come from that. And the radical fix is the Chonyugu Constitution. Since November 2016, DSA's membership has increased from about 5,000 to 35,000 nationwide. The number of local groups has grown from 40 to 181, including 10 in Texas. Houston's once dormant chapter now has nearly 300 members. We want to see money stop controlling everything. That includes politics, said Amy Zachmeyer, 34, a union organizer who helped revive the moribund Houston chapter. Okay, well, if you want to have money stop controlling politics, well, the way to do it then is to have each member of the House of Representatives represent a small number of population. For example, 2,100. All right, so that a member of the House needs a very small number of people to get elected. And then have the president chosen by the House of Representatives in a short period. You know, have anybody, let's say, for example, let's say that anybody with 10 supporters in the House of Representatives is automatically a presidential candidate. You do your first round, and then the top 7 people go to the second round, and the top 6 people go to the next round, top 5, until you get to someone with a majority of the vote. Gee, I wonder if someone would think of that. Yes, actually, it's already in the Chonyugu Constitution. So that's how you get money out of politics. That just resonates with millennials who are making less money than their parents did, and are less able to buy a home, and drowning in student debt. That's true, yeah. But that's not capitalism, all right? That's something else. That's anyway. That's there are ways to not drown in student debt. And you can watch the King's videos on that. Mrs. Zackemeyer, who pays about $1,000 a month in student loans, says that financial burden helped convince her to become a socialist. Studies suggest that young people with few memories of the Cold War embrace socialism far more than older people do. A 2016 survey of 18 to 29-year-olds by Harvard's Institute of Politics found that 16% identified as socialists, while 33% supported socialism. Only 42% supported capitalism, while a majority, 51%, said they did not. So that is why the eternal Constitution is necessary, and why it is necessary to have a provision in there that keeps government to within 10% of GDP. Total government revenue cannot exceed 10% of the gross domestic product. That is how we keep socialism from rearing its ugly head. Because here, the younger generation will always want something for nothing. Oh, I'm paying $1,000 a month for a student loan. When I was going to college, I thought, oh, well, I don't have to worry about repaying my loans until after college. Now that I'm out of college now, all of a sudden I'm getting these bills every month for $1,000. What's going on? Planning would have been great. The younger generation will always lean towards socialism, and so that's why it's so important to have that provision in the Constitution and make the Constitution unamendable. Those results surprised John Della Volpe, the Institute's director of polling, so much that he thought they might be a mistake. He conducted a new study, this time of the general population, and got the same result. The only group that expressed net positive support for capitalism were people over 50 years old. He said, the largest generation of Americans in history, millennials, have lost confidence. They are interested in finding a better way. But concentrating power in the government is not a better way. Many socialist candidates candidates sound less like revolutionaries and more like traditional Democrats who seek a return to policies in the mold of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. And FDR is the source of one of the big sources of the problem. They want single-payer health care. That means government health care, all right? That means single-payer health care. That's another way of saying that the government pays the government is the one that pays out the costs. A higher minimum wage. That's not just anti-capitalism. That's anti-free market. It's anti-market, and you can't go against the market. The market always is functioning. All right. So if you raise labor costs, then your prices are going to have to rise. A higher minimum wage, greater protections for unions, but others advocate more extreme changes, such as abolishing the prison system. In case of Mr. Bynum, he wants an end to a cash bail system that requires people accused of crimes, even minor offenses, to pay money to be released from jail before trial. Some local Democratic Party leaders worry that talking openly about being a socialist is only going to make it harder to defeat Republican opponents, and it is unclear how many older voters who are more likely to vote in midterm cycles could be turned off by the idea of voting for a socialist. DSA, despite its criticism of the Democratic Party, does not identify itself as a third party. Instead, many members work within the party's progressive wing to support their goals. Diversity helps the party, said Christine Pelosi, a California member of the Democratic National Committee who has focused on making the party more connected to grassroots activists. I welcome their constructive criticism. Christine Pelosi. Where have we heard that name before? Pelosi. Many Democrats have begun to ask socialists for their support and adopt some of the DSA's platform on health care and pay. In Pittsburgh, listen up, Pennsylvania, 8 Democrats in this year's midterm cycle sought the endorsement of the local DSA chapter. We need to know who those people are. People are more willing to come out and say, I'm a Democratic socialist running, said Jorge Roman Romero, 24, who helps lead a new DSA chapter in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where 6 Democratic candidates, 4 of whom are willing to run as Democratic socialists, sought the group's endorsement. It's not a liability to say that anymore. But others, especially among the influx of new members, want to keep their distance from the Democratic Party, which they see as hopelessly compromised by corporate donations. The new younger people are much more willing to say, we're not going to tie ourselves to the Democratic Party, said Francis Reed, 37, an education teacher, researcher who joined the East Bay DSA chapter in California on Mr. Trump's inauguration day. At the same time, we're nowhere near being able to launch a third party. Ms. Reed, who made campaign calls for Hillary Clinton in 2016, said she joined DSA after experiencing a profound disillusionment with the Democratic Party in the wake of Mr. Trump's victory. The organization gave her an outlet to pour her energy into door-knocking in a Medicare for All campaign and discussing political texts in free evening classes put on by members of the group. The class is known as Socialist School, including readings by Karl Marx and articles in Jacobin, a popular new socialist magazine. Ms. Reed has become a class instructor and vice chairwoman at the East Bay chapter, which has about 1,000 members. You know, Marx was really out of his mind. I mean, he wrote Das Kapital was about that thick, and I had to read it actually in college because I was actually somewhat into socialism when I was in college. So I took a class in I've forgotten what it was, but we had to read that stupid book. And it is a stupid book. If after the election I had tried to join the Democratic Party, what would I have done? She asked. There's no night school to learn more about ideas. The Democratic Party is essentially a fundraising apparatus. Well, that's true. Acceptance of socialism today still falls short of its heyday in the 1910s and 20s, when the Socialist Party of America had over 113,000 members and more than 1,000 elected officials, including 2 members of Congress, according to Jack Ross, author of The Socialist Party of America, A Complete History. By the 1950s, socialism was widely seen as antithetical to the American way of life. In 1982, Michael Harrington, author of The Other America, a seminal book about poverty, helped found the Democratic Socialists of America, which aimed to realign the Democratic Party toward increased protections for unions and the poor. But the group never gained much traction until now. I think when people really look at the Constitution, they'll find that it is a headwind Constitution. And I think they'll find that many of the goals that left-wing people, socialists, advocate are achievable through the Chonigu Constitution. Income inequality, the reduction of prison population, because you're getting rid of laws. So, punishment can be handled more on a community level, state community, and family level, which is what Father advocated. Hey, the legalization of pot. That should have. Hey, how come the hippies aren't busting our door down, for that? Across the country, socialists are focusing on hyper-local issues. In Cincinnati, activists helped save the wing of a public library from privatization. In Austin, they pushed to pass what has been called the first mandatory paid sick leave requirement in the South. There's a lot of power in getting people to come together and do things together, said Brian Laverne, 22, a biomedical researcher in Houston who became a socialist after a drug therapy he had been working on was purchased by a private company that increased the price. Houston is incredibly atomizing, Mr. Laverne said. We sit in our cars, drive to our suburbs, don't know our neighbors. We're countering that. Mr. Bynum, the candidate for judge in Houston, approaches politics in that same spirit. He collected nearly all of the signatures required for his campaign outside the county jail from family members of defendants who could not afford to post bail. He has forsworn donations from lawyers practicing before the court that he is running for and intends to staff a table outside the jail during the campaign with the help of DSA volunteers. He wants his campaign to highlight injustices in Harris County, where historically roughly 40% of the defendants in misdemeanor court were kept in jail because they could not pay bail. Mr. Bynum, an immigration expert in the county's public defender's office, is not the first to raise issues on how unfair Harris County's bail system is to the poor. Other Democrats have fought for the same cause. The system of cash bail is now in dispute in a federal court. But the Harris County Democratic Party is struggling to figure out what to make of Mr. Bynum, who they say stands a good chance of being elected, along with other Democrats on the local ballot in November. Mr. Bynum's Republican opponent, Dan Simmons, a former prosecutor backed by religious conservatives, is already fundraising under the slogan, "Reject Socialism." We cannot afford to have Democrats, let alone democratic socialists, take over our country and state, he wrote on Facebook. So when the Republicans oppose socialism, they've got to understand what socialism is. They cannot just say, okay, well, this is, government take over this, government take over that. They need to make the point that socialism is the concentration of power. Socialism is fascism. This is their slogan. This is the slogan that they need. Socialism is fascism. Yeah, because it concentrates power in the government. There's your bumper sticker for you. Socialism is fascism. Gerald Bernberg, a former chairman of the Harris County Democratic Party, has discouraged Mr. Bynum from talking about socialism or bail reform on the campaign trail. Socialism is too taboo in Texas, he said. Duh. And although bail reform is important, he said, it's not an issue that inspires voters in Harris County. The way to win in November, Mr. Bernberg advised, was simply to turn out Democrats. To do that, the county Democratic Party needed money to pay for mailings and voter lists. In a meeting, Mr. Bernberg, a 71-year-old lawyer, asked Mr. Bynum to contribute $20,000 to the effort. Mr. Bynum made no promises. If I have the money, I will give them money because I can't organize a get-out-the-vote campaign myself, Mr. Bynum said. But I am focused more on building a movement than I am on helping Democrats get elected. My priority is reaching people who aren't being spoken to at all. Well, so the Democratic Party does have an interesting problem, I suppose you could call it. With understanding what to do about socialism. As we go up to the May 15th primary in Pennsylvania, I'm thinking of doing something that I used to do in my own family when our kids were living at home. And as they, living at home or close to home, and as they came to be voting age, what I would do is I would announce to our family my voting preferences. Say this is who I'm going to vote for, and so I'm thinking of doing the same thing on a King's Report broadcast sometime between now and May 15th. I'm going to go to the election commission or election committee site for my precinct, and I'm going to download a sample ballot. You can do that. You can go to your election, whatever county you're living in, just to do a Google search for the name of your county and then election committee or election commission. And on that website, you will find a sample ballot. And in the case of Pennsylvania, because the primary is coming up on May 15th, already that sample ballot is available. It's available today. I've already looked at it. And then I'm just going to go through that ballot and tell people who I'm going to vote for and why. And you will notice that many of the names on that ballot are ones that we've never heard of. For example, Lieutenant Governor. Do you know who's running for Lieutenant Governor of the state of Pennsylvania? Well, there's a bunch of people, but I promise you never heard of any of them. So who are you going to vote for? Well, as owners of Chunuguk, it's our responsibility to figure out who these people are and why pick one and be able to say the reasons for picking that particular person. You can't just go into the voting booth and sort of randomly pick one, because that's going to cause problems later on. We saw, for example, Supreme Court justices. When I voted for Supreme Court justice in the last election, I didn't know who I was voting for, I confess. But now we see that the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania has essentially violated the Pennsylvania Constitution, and just because Democratic Party members are outnumber Republicans on that in that 7-member court, they've just thrown out the congressional districting map that was used in 3 previous elections, and created their own, completely against the Pennsylvania Constitution. So who we vote for matters, and so we need to know who we're voting for. So I'm going to do that sometime. I'm not sure exactly when yet. I need to do research on the different candidates and see who I can support responsibly. But anyway, you can look forward to that sometime between now and May 15th. All right, we've come to the time when we need to go off the air and go do something else for the day. I see that the sun has risen outside. It's light outside now, and I think it's going to be a nice, wonderful day. Relatively warm, not quite into the 60s, but in the upper 50s. So maybe a good time to get out to nature and enjoy nature and enjoy God and do a little meditation. This is Saturday, a day of rest for many people. But remember, Saturday is the 7th day, so it is the Sabbath. So be sure and worship God today. All right? Thank you very much for being with me this morning, and I wish you all of God's blessings. So God bless, Godspeed, and may His kingdom come.